Hello, ladies and germs. This is Greg Drevinstead, editor-in-chief at Rider Magazine, and your host for the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast. Our guest today is Dr. Gregory Frazier. Dr. Frazier has been described as America's #1 extreme motorcycle adventurer. He has circumnavigated the globe 6 times on a motorcycle, including once with a passenger. Dr. Frazier is an author, a photographer, and a filmmaker with 16 books, 10 films, and countless articles to his credit. He has a new book out called Adventure Motorcyclist, Frazier Shrugged. Dr. Frazier, welcome to the show.
Greg, it's nice to be with Rider Magazine. It's one of my favorite magazines. I've been with Rider for years. I used to submit articles and I've watched the transition, and I still get it. I'm a digital subscriber now, and great job you're doing there. Carry me forward into
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, Rider's been around for a long time. I know you've written, countless articles in all kinds of publications. I've been an admirer of your writing for many years as well. It's interesting because the first and only time you and I have met, let's see, I'm in California right now. You're in Colorado at the moment?
Correct.
Yeah, the first and only time you and I met in person was in Thailand a little over 10 years ago at the Bangkok Motorbike Festival.
That's correct. 13 time zones away from here, exactly halfway around the world.
Exactly. So when COVID and pandemic stuff isn't screwing up your travel plans, you live part of the year in Thailand?
I'm usually over there for about 5 to 6 months. I went into Thailand first 21 years ago as a tourist, and I said, hey, I like this. It's motorcycle central, and it's like 30 million motorcycles over there and 70 million people. So for a motorhead like me, that was like I'm in the candy store or the China shop, whatever you want to call it.
Absolutely. I mean, I had the good fortune of being there with my brother, with Ron Ayers when he was still alive. We got to do a tour of northern Thailand from Chiang Mai all the way to do some scenic stuff, and then ended up in Bangkok for the Motorbike Festival. Absolutely beautiful country. I would love to go back. So that's great.
Well, come on over. Give me a shot before you come. We'll gin something up. I'm based up there in Chiang Mai.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. So you've been around the world half a dozen times on a motorcycle. You've written books and films about your adventures, but let's sort of go back a little bit. How did you get into riding?
Writing? W-R?
Well, both. I mean, but start out with motorcycles, then we'll get to the writing with, words part.
Well, the adventure into motorcycles was when my mother said, no, I can't have one. Like most children, I went the other direction. So I was about 17 or 18 when I first stepped on a motorcycle, and it was a moped. It was a small, I think a Sears model, something that it had pedals, but you moved in the wind. And from there I graduated. So about 56 years ago.
Wow.
I started.
You've done some road racing. I've seen some photos of you on some tracks, winning some endurance races, racing with Reg Pridmore.
I was in the game from 1971 up until 1974.
Wow.
1971 was a real steep learning curve. And then 1972, I started to win races. And 1973, we finally captured what I started out wanting to do, which was win the 5-hour endurance race on a BMW in Danville, Virginia.
Cool. Awesome.
So I raced, and I've raced a lot of motorcycles since then. Honda, my 1936 Indian Sport Scout. I raced that up Pikes Peak, and I flat tracked it at Sturgis. Road raced it at Daytona, Savannah. So I've been in and out of the racing game, but now I'm too old. Back then, when I was in the game, I didn't understand the equation between speed and pain.
Absolutely. So you have a racing background. That's you certainly developed your skill set, but you're best known for traveling around the world on a motorcycle. You've done that. You've done it 6 times on a motorcycle. Is that a record? I can't imagine anybody's done it more times than you have.
I have an acquaintance who has gone around the world 7 times, but twice on bicycles.
Oh, okay.
So he motorized his bicycle circle of the globe.
Okay.
I've I've never applied for any records. You know, like Guinness, they give you records for how many nails you can shove up your nose or how many worms you could eat. It doesn't ring my bell.
Right,
In
right.
fact, the first loop around the globe, I didn't really know I had done it. I was filming the best roads that I could find in the world, and I worked my way around the globe.
So how did you get it? So you have the title of doctor, you have a PhD, is that correct?
I like to tell people I have a PhD in the survival of the roads of the world. I've been in some of the ugliest places, Egypt, Cairo, downtown Cairo. It's really ugly. Mexico City, India,
Right.
Bangladesh, and I've survived them.
So how did you get into filmmaking? And then, I mean, it sounds like, as you were filmmaking, you were doing that Best Roads project. You were doing that. You were on a motorcycle as you were filming that project?
Yes, we mounted cameras on the motorcycle, much like you'd have a GoPro put today, but they were the big, 10-pound, 15-pound cameras on the gas tank shooting through the windshield. I didn't do the Walt Fulton one where I had it on the side of my helmet with a battery on the other side,
Right.
but we did about a dozen films. The 10 best highways in the Alps, the 10 best highways in America, the 10 best highways in Australia. I was writing the scripts for those at the same time, and had to learn to use the right vernacular and also keep it brief.
Sure.
But the idea was to share information.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, sounds like a great project to be able to not only film but experience some of those roads. I mean, I've been to the Alps, I've never been to Australia, and I'm sure I've maybe sampled a couple of those roads here and there. But one of the things I love about riding wherever is that it's some of the hidden gems. Some of the famous roads are famous for good reason, but some of the true best roads are ones you probably never heard about.
Correct. And
Yeah,
I thought I found some really good ones, but I keep finding more.
yeah,
My
yeah.
tastes have changed also. Back then, I made fun of people that went from restaurant to restaurant. It's not a bad way to look at a good road.
So it sounds like the first time you went around the world was more or less almost kind of by accident because you had this project you're working on. So what motivated you to go around, a second time, a third time, a fourth time? You even went with a passenger one time, right?
Yes, I took a grandmother who had Parkinson's, and she wanted to go around the world, but she didn't want to ride a motorcycle. So she found me and said, "Would you take me around the world on the back of your motorcycle?" And I conjured that image and said, "Oh, I haven't done this before." But that was trip number 5. Trip number 2 came about after I met a German guy that purported to be an expert on going around the world. He'd never done it himself, but one of those book experts. And he said, "Well, because you didn't file a flight plan with me before you left on your trip around the world, I can't validate that you did it." And I thought, if this guy was in America, we'd have him in a rubber room. Do I care if he validates me or not? No. But it kind of stuck in my craw, and I put together a plan to go around the world, but tag the highest points on the planet that you could do and the lowest points. So I went up to Dead Horse, Alaska, and then down to Ushuaia in South America, and then up to the North Cape in Europe, and down to the bottom of Africa, Cape Agulhas, and then I even went to the bottom of New Zealand. If you look on a map, it's even lower than Cape Agulhas on the global map. So I was going like a big W around the world. And I had a fixed plan. I had airline tickets in advance, and a real fixed schedule. But that one said, okay, yeah, I had a plan versus the one before, which was I kind of got lost.
So again, you've done this multiple times. So what was it that you had maybe wanted to experience for your third journey, your fourth journey? Is it to go to countries that you had not visited previously? Was it to take a different kind of route, to use a different kind of motorcycle? I mean,
Well, the third loop around the globe was to do it on motorcycles that were manufactured on the continent I was crossing.
oh,
And I never found a motorcycle that was manufactured on the continent of Antarctica, nor Australia. They make some in Australia, but not manufactured for public sale. So I used a Indian Chief to cross North America, and then a BMW to cross Europe, and then a Enfield, and then a Honda to go through Asia, and then back to America. I used a Harley Davidson to get back home.
Cool.
So that was using motorcycles that were manufactured on the continents that I was crossing. And the next loop around the globe was kind of a dumb one. I'd built a bike for a magazine that was to be a good round the world bike. I'd used BMWs mostly before then. And Kawasaki had that KLR 650 out, and I'd seen them. This was in 2001. So we built a round the world KLR 650. And in my studio where I do my artwork and bike construction and race bike maintenance, one of my buddies was there one night, and we were swilling and chilling. And he said, well, the motorcycle's done. Walk your talk. You said it can go around the world. And I ended up using that KLR and took 5 months out of my life and went around the world with it. And it's now sitting in the National Motorcycle Museum out in Anamosa, Iowa.
Awesome.
So that was trip number 4. And then trip number 5 was the lady with Parkinson's. We took 14 months and did about, I think it was about 40,000 miles on a number of different motorcycles. She really had a tough go of it because of her Parkinson's, but she hung in there all the way up to the North Cape and all the way down to Ushuaia and Cape Agulhas and even Dead Horse, Alaska.
So that was a conventional motorcycle. It wasn't a sidecar. I mean, where did you carry your gear? Because normally you put your gear where the passenger sits. So.
Well, we didn't have any sidecars. So we did change motorcycles rather than ship them expensively across water.
Right.
We used a KLR 650 2-up to go up to Dead Horse, Alaska. And then in South America, we used a 1982 GL 650, which is a Honda. And we learned to cut down all the excess weight. Anyway, we used a BMW 1150 in Europe, and we also used my K100 RT that I keep in Europe. And then in Africa, we used a GS 1150. And then in Asia, we used a Yamaha Tenere. All of them are, well, you wouldn't call the GL 650 a dual sport or the K100 RT, but hey, they're just motorcycles, 2 wheels, and we didn't care what they were badged as.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Any motorcycle can be an adventure bike. It just sort of depends on the mindset and the rider. So, I've never been around the world. Most people have never left their home country. So having been around the world multiple times and multiple circumstances, what fascinates you most about traveling around the world and visiting some of these places?
I look at the cultures, and I study the economics of the countries that I'm going through. I'm an economist, and I like to look at how these countries are making it, whether they're communist. I went to Cuba, for instance, back in 2001. I've been to Vietnam, Myanmar. So I've looked at the communist countries, and then I was in Germany when the wall came down. So I ran up and looked at East Germany. And then I look at the capitalistic countries, and I'm fascinated with the way they percolate along. So I look at the infrastructures, like in India. I looked at and Bangladesh, but I looked at the infrastructure of those countries. They did well until the British pulled out, and then the infrastructures just kind of imploded, and you can see it. And you question, well, how is capital developed here in these countries that is needed, or a debt is needed to take it to a higher level, cost of living for the people, for instance. Like you were in Thailand. Thailand's per capita income is about $2,500 a year. In the neighboring country of Laos or Cambodia, it's about $250 a year, or 1/10. So I look at those things, and I'm not a real good temple viewer. I don't like to take the rug factory tours. I don't really follow the Lonely Planet's suggested tourist destinations. I'm more interested in, what's a dollar worth? What was it worth? Where's it going?
Sure.
And how's their economy perking along? I was fascinated in Vietnam. Those guys have, that's the fastest expanding economy in Southeast Asia. And you look at it when I was, listening to shells drop over there and airplanes take off. It was knocked down to the bottom of the register, but now it's really done well.
Right. Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, different cultures, different economies, they, like I said, they follow different paths and have some are, models of success. Some are certainly struggling. I know this whole pandemic thing has really sort of, knocked some of these countries, off whatever path they were on. It's a real challenge. So, we are talking about adventure riding. Your sense of adventure is one to go out and experience a culture, immerse yourself in it. You're not just passing through and snapping your photo and sort of doing it for Instagram. But adventure riding's been really popular in the last few years. The motorcycles are popular. They've been a bright spot in motorcycle sales since the industry's been pretty stagnant since the Great Recession. But adventure riding is really not new. I mean, how long has adventure riding been around?
I'd submit that it's been around since the first guy threw a leg over that wooden wheeled thing that they made in Germany. That must have been an adventure to trust that compression steam engine underneath his junk to go 100 yards. But it all takes place in the mind. What we used to call motorcycle touring. And I did a book on motorcycle touring for the world's biggest motorbook publisher. Back then, the word adventure was around, but it was called motorcycle touring, and today it's called adventure touring. A lot of people say that the BMW GS created the niche of adventure motorcycling, and that's really wrong. But if it gets said often enough, and there was a German guy that said this back in 1945, he said, if you take a lie and you tell it often enough, it soon becomes truth. And I've seen it published repeatedly that BMW created the niche of adventure motorcycling. When with the GS, the enduro motorcycle, when the designer Hans Muth of the GS motorcycle gave a presentation on how he arrived at the BMW GS prototype, he not once in his presentation, and I've listened to it twice now, he does not use the word adventure. When I went to the two-wheel museum in Heidelberg, I mean, not Heidelberg, anyway, in Germany, some years ago, as a display of the BMW GS, what they had was the Paris-Dakar replica. That was what the museum had for the GS. They've since changed that. Now they've put the R80 GS and they put the word adventure above it. So they're saying it 1,000 times, but in fact, and I'll take you back a little bit, and maybe your readers, I'm sure the rider guys all know this, but 1968, there was a group called Steppenwolf, and they had a song called Born to Be Wild. And then in 1969, the movie came out with Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper and Jack Nicholson.
Oh yeah, Easy Rider.
Yeah, and what's that song? How do the lyrics go? They said, head out on the highway looking for adventure. So there's the word in 1968, and motorcycles, and they weren't enduro motorcycles. They weren't riding on dirt. Right. They were out there on the highway with a couple of Harley choppers. I also found a book of a couple that had done a trip across America in 1913, the first woman to go across America in a sidecar in a 1913 with a 1913 Henderson and her husband. And the book is called Going Some, an Adventure. And that's a recounting of something that happened in 1913.
Right.
So when we take a look at the word, we call it adventure motorcycling, adventure motorcycles, adventure bike. It's been out there for a long time. It's just become a popular cliche, and it'll morph into something else 20 years from now.
Well, and you've written some historical books. You wrote a book about Clancy and his, when did he first go around the world? What year was that?
He started in 1912 and finished in 1913. He used a 1912 Henderson motorcycle, 7 horsepower, 1 gear. You look at the shifter on the side of the tank and the pictures that we have of him, and people think that's like a Harley or an Indian tank shifter. It's not. It's an in and out clutch to the 1 gear. So his speed was about top, maybe 35 miles an hour.
Sure.
But he did just over 20,000 miles as he circled the globe in that period, 1912, 1913.
Well, and roads, I mean, were much more crude than they are today. We didn't have, there weren't gas stations available. And, is that I'm sure anybody that travels around the world on a motorcycle, it's going to be some sense of adventure. There are going to be some challenges, but, we have, in terms of the reliability of motorcycles, sat phones, everything, credit cards, internet connections. It's just, you can't truly get lost in some ways. And so many people are trying to document the ride as they go. They've got sponsorships. But yeah, I know when you've done it in the past, it's much more of an old school approach, a lot more simple. And like you said, trying to immerse yourself and not necessarily just, it wasn't a sponsored ride necessarily. So.
I hate to admit this, Greg, but I'm a Luddite. I still don't have a smartphone and I still don't use a GPS. Let me share with you, because I know that your readers can't see this, but I'm going to describe it. I had a couple guys that wanted me to take them across Europe and Russia. And one of them was the money guy. And he sat in DC and he learned Russian because we were going to go across Russia.
Sure.
First big town we hit in Russia is Moscow. Those two guys turned around and headed home with their GPS, with their electronic dictionary, with their cell phones. And I was there and I was committed to finishing the trip around the world. I'd already gone halfway when I hit Moscow.
Sure.
So as they left, I thought, I'll just buy a map at the local gas station. I'll be fine. Well, they don't sell maps at gas stations in Russia. This is 2002. I don't know what they do now, but and I had a little cheap dollar compass that Andy Goldfine had given me as kind of a joke when he heard I was headed off out through the emptiness of Siberia, and that did point north. But I had carried with me a map of the world. I'm showing it to you, that you rip out of a airline magazine.
Oh yeah.
It's a fold out, and this one happens to be from I think China Airlines. That is my map that I used to get across 8 time zones of Russia.
Wow.
So
probably not a lot of roads to choose from.
Well, there was one.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was just finding it. They didn't have roads that went around the cities. That one road went right through the middle of the city. Right. So it was a warren of roads once you hit the city. But I got across in about 3 weeks. And when I got lost, I made some new acquaintances.
That's great. That's truly traveling and surviving by your wits, which is something that a lot of people are, not willing to get outside their comfort zone. And so to truly put yourself out there where there's not a net, so to speak, you just sort of jump and you go for it. And so, that's very admirable. That's the sense of adventure that, and again, as we've talked about, adventure can be anything. It can be taking your Goldwing to a campground and just, pitching a tent. You don't have to go off-road. You don't have to have a big rugged motorcycle. Like you said, an easy rider, they were just, they just had their bed rolls and they had they would just put a little campfire somewhere. And, but they were on choppers. You can be on anything for a sense of adventure. So, but, like I said, you've written a lot of books. People like to read about the adventures of others because not everybody has the wherewithal or the capability or the, I guess, willingness, probably more than anything, to commit to the time and effort that would involve in going around the world. They got mortgage payments, they got kids or something. So a lot of people have the wanderlust and the dream, but not that many people have done it.
Today, I think it's just time and money.
Yeah.
You know, how much money do you want to blow, and how much time can you carve out?
So the bikes that you've ridden over the years, I'm not sure if you've ridden some contemporary bikes. You talked about KLRs and GSs, and what would you consider one of the better adventure bikes these days? Or that, if you were to go around the world again, maybe you wouldn't do it now, but if you were, what kind of bike would you choose for a journey like that?
There's so many out there that are good.
Yeah.
That's a hard call, Greg. Um, in my new book, Adventure Motorcyclist, Frazier Shrugged, I shrugged because that question came up, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And in that book, I republished my choice of Adventure Motorcycle of the Year. And again, this year, I grant the same motorcycle my choice of Adventure Motorcycle of the Year. Now, I'm not it doesn't have to be badged adventure. So my choice is the Kawasaki Z H2 SX.
Wow.
If you want to show up and put those other guys back a step, show up with that 300 mile per hour, kilometer per hour, horsepower. I had a chance to ride one at Sepang in Malaysia, press intro, and I almost did it, and it was on the Grand Prix track. But then I thought, what am I going to do with the extra 160 horsepower? I'm like a 40 horsepower guy. But
Right.
if I had my pick, and time and money wasn't real, that's my pick of the Adventure Motorcycle of the Year. Kawasaki has done everything to make that just, in my opinion, and I'm a road race guy, I admit it. But that every time I walk by, there's one here in town in a case. It hasn't come out yet. I said, oh man, I want to take that around the world.
That's cool. So tell us about your new book. Like I said, this is your 16th book, and it's called Adventure Motorcyclist, Frazier Shrugged. Tell us about this book.
This book was, well, there were three purposes in this book. One is I wanted to capture, and my publisher wanted to capture, what this eyeball could look at in the year 2000 through 2020 of this niche of adventure motorcycling. 50 years from now, some kid's gonna look back and say, what was that? What did they do? How did they define adventure motorcycling? So we picked through about 300 articles that I'd written over the years, and some good, some bad. We threw out the junk. We polished the good ones. Paul Smith, who's the editor of an adventure motorcycle magazine, he and I collaborated on this, and he threw out what I thought was good, and I rejected it and put it back in. But it was to capture the essence of adventure motorcycling over the last 22 years. The second purpose was not lose money on this book because it's a real small niche. When you look at the motorcycling niche as a whole, it's blossoming, but it'll never be huge. And number three purpose was to get it out there, get it done. So it's out there. It's called Adventure Motorcyclist. That's me. And then Frazier Shrugged. And it's available if you go to soundrider.com, which is the distributor.
Okay.
And click on their store. And right now, go on down to what they call tips and tricks. The book is there. Right now, it's only available in a print copy. And we chose to go that way because to go to an ebook, you make about 1/10 of a print copy. So we recovered, the publisher recovered their costs initially with the print copy. It'll be ebook probably by the end of the year.
Okay. Well, we'll include a link in the show notes. Like I said, that's, and that is just one of many books that you have. Can you find some of your other books at Soundwriter? Do you have them, some of them on Amazon, various places? They're kind of,
Well, some of them are out of print, but Soundwriter has my bestseller, which was a book called Motorcycle Sex. And we sold a bunch of those. It didn't have much to do with sex. It was a spoof on Freud. The
Okay.
subtitle was Freud Would Never Understand the Relationship Between Me and My Motorcycle. And Sound Riders got some of the last copies of that. I've seen that book on eBay for $400. We sold it when it came out for $20.
Ah,
I'm in the wrong end of this game. I'm the writer.
exactly.
But Sound Riders got some of those, Motorcycle Sex. They also have my book Down and Out, which is a coffee table book, all color. Those are out there. Motorcycle Sex is not available except through Sound Rider.
Okay.
They just took some of our last inventory.
Right.
But the other books are out there on Amazon, like Motorcycle Adventurer, the Clancy book, the Gasoline Tramp, which is a Clancy book that he wrote and never was able to publish. And then Motorcycle Touring, Everything You Need to Know. Those are out there.
Great.
Ebook, print copy, POD.
Okay.
So they're out there, but some of them like How to Motorcycle in Europe or How to Motorcycle in New Zealand. Those are long out of print. Those were done in the 90s. It's not worth the publisher's time to scan them and try to remarket them.
Right. So you not only wrote a lot of these books, you've documented a lot of your travels with photographs. You're a photographer. Have you done any of the filmmaking? Has any of that have been about your around the world travels, or is it mostly photos and written articles and books?
No, we did some VHS films on what we called Round the World Riders was one.
Yeah.
But those are VHS. They haven't been, and that's old stuff. This is back in the 80s, Greg.
Right.
90s. I got into the magazine world by accident. And I hate to say it, but everything I learned about writing was from Andy Warhol.
Ah.
So yeah, put that on your tree and try to figure that one out.
Right.
But I morphed into magazines and books from the VHS travel motorcycle world.
Sure. So, like I said, I know you've been kind of cooped up here in the States due to this whole pandemic thing. What do you got in the works? What have you been working on while you've been idle? I'm sure you haven't actually been idle, but you haven't been traveling the way that you normally do, I'm sure.
I was down in Mexico about a month ago,
Okay.
and the United States is big. This is not a bad place to be in quarantine, border-wise. I've got on my schedule, I'll be in California next week at the BMW 49er rally up in Mariposa, BMW rally in Great Falls, Montana next month. And then the following month, I'm going to go to the smallest, I'm going to social distance. I'm going to the smallest town in the USA. And I'm taking only back roads to get there. And the smallest town is a population of 1, but they have a library. And I'm a researcher. My academic background has been poking my nose in books. So I'm going to spend a little time researching in the library of a town of a population of 1.
And you're going to reveal what that is? Is that what state it's in at least? Or is it, you're going to keep that a guarded secret?
Let's say it's in Nebraska.
Okay.
And it's real close to the home of Danny Liska, for those BMW guys that remember Danny. He was an adventurer before it was called Adventure.
He was he involved in the Iron Butt crowd?
No, he was around before Iron Butt.
Oh, was he before that? Okay. I know the name, but I couldn't place it. So yeah.
No, Danny rode a BMW up to Alaska and left his wife in Nebraska, and then he went on down to the bottom of South America, and he came back and said to his wife, "I'm out of here," because he had a little farm out there in the rolling hills of Nebraska.
Okay. That's starting to fill in a little bit of the blanks. So, well, as you said, whether it's social distancing or just traveling, I mean, there's a lot of people that live in the United States, but not nearly as many that live in some other countries. And a lot of us that live in this country are clustered near the coasts or big cities. There is a lot of wide open space. I mean, I live in California, and even though I live on the coast, I don't have to go very far to get away from a lot of people. I mean, there is a lot of wide open space in this state where there's very few people. There's a lot more deer than people in some of these areas, or there's just, there's nothing. So, Yeah, that's what's been an enjoyable part about working at Ryder. I'm sure it's been an enjoyable thing for you for writing books and articles, is to share, your adventures with other people, and really to try to inspire them to go out and ride and go experience new places and new things. And like you said, yeah, it doesn't have to be a particular kind of motorcycle. You don't have to have the best type of gear. You really just have to have the motivation to go out and do it.
I'm with you there. I've been on a lot of motorcycles that people look at and say, well, that's not an adventure motorcycle. And I say, yeah, but I'm having a heck of an adventure.
Well, again, Dr. Frazier, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. I know, like I said, I haven't seen you in person quite a while. Hopefully I can maybe connect with you at one of these rallies or events, and we can have a couple of beers and catch up as well. So I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, tell your riders out there and subscribers to keep subscribing and talk their friends into subscribing if they hear this podcast. And then if they see me on the road or they meet me at some rally or they just want to email me, give me a shout and say, hey, Rider Magazine, that's the place.
Thanks, Dr. Frazier. I appreciate it. Thanks again for your time and for the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast. I'm Greg W. Thanks for listening, and keep the rubber side down. If you've enjoyed listening to the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, please subscribe, leave us a positive rating, and tell your friends. We also encourage you to visit ridermagazine.com, where you can get the latest in motorcycle news and reviews and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. You can also subscribe to print and digital editions of Rider Magazine, which is published 12 times a year. Thanks again for listening.